So I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'll ask you to just take notes. Occasionally during my talk, I will identify sort of a sidebar conversation that can happen. The story of Mach is relatively interesting because it's got a lot of unique twists and turns to it, each of which could be an hour-long conversation. How much time do I have? 1 hour. Okay. So we can have exactly one of those sidebars, a fraction. And then what I'll probably do is I'll talk for 20 minutes, and then I'll maybe 30 minutes, and I'll leave the rest for questions and answers. Okay. So first of all, I am an MIT alumni, graduated in 1987. My field of expertise was automatic transmission design for cars, which has absolutely nothing to do with almost anything I ever did from that point onward, which happens to quite a few people. But I did get my first job at an engineering firm in, how many of you have lived in Boston? Well, actually everybody went to MIT, you had to have. Yeah, I don't think MIT does distance learning yet. In any case, went to MIT in Boston, worked for a company called BBN. Those of you who lived in Boston, you probably heard of BBN, both Beranek and Newman. They're like the Xerox Park in Boston. They invented everything and made money off of nothing. For those of you who, there's this thing called the Internet. It was developed at BBN in the 1960s. It was called the ARPANET at the time. It was a U.S. defense contract by what is now DARPA. It used to be ARPA. The guy who I worked with him on a project recently. His name's Ray Tomlinson. He's the guy who put the @ sign in your email addresses. He still works at BBN. So that was 1987 through 90 for me. A company that's known for designing and building great new technology and then dumping it, letting somebody else run off and commercialize it, and moving on to the next interesting research project. So they invented the ARPANET in the late 60s, which turned into the Internet. They didn't make much money off of that. They the first company to show two computers talking to each other via a twisted pair, essentially computer networking in the late 60s as well. They bought the first two PDPs from DEC, and then had the two of them communicating on a common problem. They made a little bit of money off of computer networking, but not much. Parallel processing, the first company to show two CPUs sharing a problem. They tried to make some money off of that. They sold a parallel processing machine called Butterfly for a couple of years. Anyway, it's a company of, some people think of it as like MIT graduate school. It's a corporate entity that a lot of MIT graduates go to. They work there for a couple of years and they go do something that actually makes money afterwards, which is exactly what happened to me. So I graduated from MIT, went to work for BBN, both Beranek and Newman, on this new DARPA project called SimNet. SimNet was a project, it was about a $200 or $250 million project to demonstrate the networking of simulators together. Up until that time, simulators were typically the individual flight simulator that you've seen in the movies with the big dome, the projection pictures on the inside of the dome with one pilot on the inside learning how to fly an airplane. Well, this one smart Air Force colonel thought, hey, if I created a networking technology to connect a bunch of simulators together, I can actually rehearse an entire war in simulation. And he funded BBN to develop this thing called SimNet, which gave birth to the field that Mach became an expert in, called distributed simulation. So it's an entire technology area called distributed simulation, which is a networking technology for connecting large numbers of simulators together for joint warfighting and for experimentation, that sort of thing. So I worked on that research project for about 3.5 years, and a friend of mine who I worked with there, we decided that we didn't think BBN was, though a tremendously innovative place technologically speaking, did not really understand business and how to make money off of things. So we had visions in our head of network virtual reality, online video games. This was 1990. Okay, so well before online games were even known, well before game companies had ever networked the games at all, certainly well before the Internet was very prolific and popular. So we left in 1990, formed Mach Technologies in the basement of my house. So one arc of conversation that somebody should jot down a little note is that we started the company with no money. So we each took $6,000 of personal savings out of our pocket. We bought so that's $12,000 total. We bought an $11,000 computer and paid our health insurance bill for the next year, and then day 2 of the company had no money. But I owned the house, so I didn't have rent. The company could live for free in the house, and he and I were both pretty frugal guys. We didn't really know that the financing was such an important part of starting the company. They told us. So we just figured out, well, we'll just start writing proposals and doing things and see if we can make some money. So we didn't. So our ARC number 1 that could take an hour is how to start a company without any money. So we worked. Fortunately for us, the U.S. government has some very good small business grant programs for doing research and developing products for the Department of Defense. In the United States, it's called the Small Business Innovative Research Program, SBIR. I don't know if there's an equivalent here in Singapore. I know there's a lot of a similar type of funding mechanism in Singapore. But the SBIR program is designed for small businesses to develop a product that the Department of Defense or any other part of the government would then buy back later. And it's specifically intended to enable the small business to retain intellectual property rights and commercialize it for other industries as well. Okay, so it's one of the few proactive industrial development policies the United States has, but it's a very good one. The entire U.S. government budget is skimmed by 2.5%, and that money is swept into a big bank account, and then that money is reserved for small businesses to do these SBIR grants. The first phase is usually, now it's $100,000. The second phase is $750,000. So you can actually do some damage for $850,000 if you know how to treat the money wisely. So we started in this grant program. That's why we didn't need much money. We started writing proposals, and eventually we started winning these contracts, which kind of bootstrapped our product line. So starting in 1991, we won our first grant in the SBIR program. So another whole arc of conversation is how to do business with the government, how to win government contracts, how to keep your intellectual property rights, and how to develop products off of that, which we do have some experience with. So in 1991, we started out as a contracting company doing research for the Department of Defense, knowing all along we wanted to become a products company. And we came out with our first commercial off-the-shelf product in 1992. September of 1992. It's called VR Link. It's a piece of networking software that it's gone through many revisions, but 18 years later today is the leading piece of middleware in the military industry for networking simulations together. So if Boeing wants to connect one of their flight simulators to a submarine simulator made by General Dynamics, or a satellite simulator made by Lockheed Martin, they all buy this little piece of software that implements this networking protocol standard. Okay, so we sell that little piece. And we started that in 1992 when the market was just so early. It was ridiculously early. So we really had first mover advantage there. So another arc of conversation: what to do when you're just way too early to a marketplace and have to survive for a while the market catches up to you. And our strategy was to make this piece of networking software relatively inexpensive in the defense space, so that we could upsell future products that were much more expensive. And 18 years later, that strategy has paid off quite well. VR Link is still probably our largest product volume-wise as far as number of licenses that we sell, but it's not our highest priced product anymore, and it's not the product that brings in the most revenue anymore. So the sort of razor blade handle strategy worked quite well in this case, and for a lot of people it works very well. It's another whole during the time when we were doing all this consulting and contracting work for the U.S. Department of Defense, we ran a dual company. We had a products group that were making commercial off-the-shelf products to commercial off-the-shelf standards, documentation and release engineering and all that. And then we had another group that was doing this government research that was producing the intellectual property for use by the product side. That's a very hard thing to do. Even much larger companies will find executives saying, I need to decide what my company is going to be, either a product company or a consulting and contracting company. But even when we were very small, we managed to do both, and we grew them up over time. So in 1992, when we first came out with our first product, we were doing 0 revenue